Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and I want to talk about Parkland. You'll have to bear with me a little bit. I normally don't upload from the road, but I'm currently in Muncie, Indiana. This weekend I'm teaching citizen response to an active shooter at MTAC in Muncie. And I had planned on doing a video on this because I've already gotten quite a few questions about it. So I was going to do a questions answered video, but I felt like I should probably just do it now while I have the cognate thoughts in place to what I want to talk about. Usually when something like this happens, I give it some time because we all know that the initial facts are usually not the facts. One of the initial facts that I heard, first I heard it on the news, and then I asked some people in law enforcement in that area, which I'll get to confirm that there was a school resource officer on scene and he did not make entry. 4 to 6 minutes, shooting was going on inside. Every round that deputy heard was potentially another life lost. 17 dead. The officer stayed outside, did nothing, despite having equipment, being in uniform, and having no known obstruction to his ability to enter, close with, and confront the shooter. Just recently now they're talking about the fact that there were actually 4 deputies outside. Now I have it on good authority from an officer that works in the area that Broward County does provide active shooter response training to their deputies. Not only single officer response, the single officer program which I'll talk a little bit about, but they also provide the exigency team model, which after Columbine became very, very popular. The idea was 2 or more officers would show up roughly at the same time. They'd all form up in cool little formations. They'd make entry and they'd stop the shooter. That system is 99% bullshit. Not that it's not good training. It's just the fact that you're really counting on a lot of luxuries in order to actually be able to use it. So there's been some gatekeeping on this. People have been like, well, you weren't there. You're right, I wasn't. I wish I had been, but I wasn't. I'm not going to come into this being like, well, I would have, because I wasn't there. I don't really think I need to go down that road because I know what I would have done. I'm not going to sit here and wax poetic about all the cool things I could have done or all the great things I could have done, because that's kind of beside the point. It goes back to what I already said. Now we're not talking about 1 officer. We have 4 officers, 4 deputies from the Broward County Sheriff's Department that neglected to make entry. They willfully were negligent in the protection of life. Now, there is no legal requirement for law enforcement to prevent a crime. This stems from a Supreme Court case, which is pretty easy to find. The reason for that case actually has somewhat good intentions. It's so police departments don't get sued for failing to prevent crimes of which they would have had no way to prevent, such as someone calls 911 and police officers literally do not arrive in time to prevent a crime. That is what that law is for. Unfortunately, in situations like this, it does protect guys from being pursued, either criminally or civilly, for willful negligence and loss of life due to law enforcement having the equipment and training while being present, but failing to act to save lives or prevent the additional loss of life, or to at least help evacuate and render aid. There was an unarmed officer from Coral Springs who was on school property, unarmed, out of uniform, and he ran towards the sound of gunfire. Now, I didn't make this video necessarily to bash the Broward County Sheriff's Department. They're doing a damn fine job of that on their own. They don't need my help. This video is more directed towards general information, my feelings on the subject since I've been asked, and a correction of mindset for my law enforcement officers that follow the channel. Here's the thing, guys. Officer safety, huge deal, right? We've all heard, your number 1 job is to go home to your family. Bullshit. Your number 1 job is to adhere to the oath that you took. Officer safety is the mitigation of risk through superior techniques, tactics, and mindset. It is not the removal of risk. If you want to remove risk from your job, you're in the wrong fucking field of work. Officer safety should never be paramount to the safety of people who have no way to actively protect themselves. So if your mentality, or the mentality that your administration is pushing, is that, well, if you feel like you're outgunned, you shouldn't save lives. you got to ask yourself critically, is that the right mentality to have for law enforcement officials? Do you think like that's an acceptable mindset for our line of work? I got to be honest, I can't really agree with anyone being like, okay, you know, he's in there and he's shooting. He may have a rifle. All I brought was a handgun, so I'm going to tactically loiter, and hopefully somebody braver or better equipped than me will show up sometime soon, and they can go in. If the government, through laws, and when I say government, I mean even all the way down to the local level, in this case the high school in the state of Florida, the county, and then the state of Florida, if the government is going to disarm you through laws or legislation or ordinances, then they have a duty to protect you. I think that's pretty clear. The reason, I mean, if you look at it on the national level, the whole reason we have a military is to protect our country, our people, our citizenry. So if you take that down to the small level, you have a high school that has a school resource officer. The school resource officer is an interesting position in the fact that it's a police officer, usually from the jurisdiction in which the school resides. In this case, Broward County Sheriff's Department was providing the school resource officer, the initial guy. And his job is to deal with any law enforcement duties inside the school. It's been my experience, and there is exceptions to this, of course, but it has been my experience that school resource officers are usually nearing retirement, or they're an officer who has not really shined very well in other positions, so they kind of tuck him away at the school just to keep him, well, out of the way, out of sight, out of mind. That's not the case, but that is a possibility. I've trained school resource officers in single officer response to active shooter, and some of them have been studs. But many of the ones that I've encountered had a serious mindset issue, or they had a serious, they didn't bring a very large toolkit to the class to begin with, so they were kind of drinking from the fire hose when it came time to apply the mindset of violence to the problems in which I was asking them to solve as a law enforcement officer responding to a shooter. I've been teaching single officer response to active shooters since I worked for the Department of Defense as a training officer. It was a program that was spun up after Fort Hood, and it addressed the very real possibility and the very real reality, not just with rural agencies, but even with city agencies, that the first officer on scene may not have time, literally, to wait for other officers to arrive. He may be able to close with and stop the shooter either by denying him access to additional victims or filling him full of fucking bullet holes to stop the shooting, to stop the violence immediately. Use violence to stop violence. They're not there to talk, they're there to stop the shooter. If you look at the times in which law enforcement has been able to actively engage shooters, I think you'll find that the team-based model, which developed after Columbine in '99, has never actually been deployed in a way that people were trained to deploy it. Now, multiple officers have arrived to the same shooting. I think Trolley Mall in Utah is a good example of that, but those officers arrived. One was already there, and the other ones who responded didn't have any prior knowledge of the other officers or where they were. They all just kind of vectored in on the shooter, trapped him at a pottery barn, and they stopped him, just like they should. Couldn't call it a team-based response, even though some people who teach the team-based program have actually been like, oh yeah, that was team-based response, when in reality, if you look at how the story went down. But beside the point. Fact is, the only thing that works, the only thing that has worked, the only thing that has been working is one single officer with the motivation and the mindset to close with and stop the shooter. So for those of you in law enforcement, and again, the chances of you encountering an active shooter are actually pretty small. It's not an epidemic like the media makes it out to be, but it is a possibility, and it is something you need to accept the fact of your job. They issue you body armor for a reason. They issue you a firearm for a reason. And if you don't feel like you can be that guy, I will not hold that against you as long as you resign. This isn't gatekeeping. I already covered that. This isn't a, well, I would have. This is a kind of like a call to action, I guess, for those of you in law enforcement, and information for those of you that are not. You have a duty to protect the public, even though you don't have a legal requirement to do so, if that makes sense. No one's in law enforcement well, most of us aren't in law enforcement for the money. Some people, the higher rank you get, the more you make. So I guess at some point there could be a monetary benefit to being in law enforcement. But the average everyday patrol officer isn't doing it necessarily for the money. And you may have your own motivations. Maybe it's the only skill set you have. Maybe you kind of fell into it and you stuck with it. Maybe you would do it for free if you could afford it. And I think a lot of cops fall into that last category. And those are the kind of cops we want, so long as they, respect the badge and the oath. Because obviously there could be, people who have no business wearing the uniform who have the same mindset, and we don't want that. But officer safety gets thrown around a lot, and the mindset behind it is sometimes skewed towards forgetting the fact that you are someone's best hope for safety in many, many situations. And if you're not bringing the mindset to the table of, I will close with and stop the threat as quickly and as violently as necessary to save additional lives, even if it's only one additional life. The sooner the shooter gets stopped, the sooner aid can be rendered, and the sooner that the situation can be resolved without further loss of life or additional bloodshed. So if you're the single officer and you are already on scene or you arrive on scene, you have to act. Obviously, I can't compel you to do that, but my humble request would be that if you don't feel like you could act, then find another job. If you're in law enforcement and this video makes you angry, ask yourself why. Why do my words make you angry, and why do you disagree with me? If you're not in law enforcement and you feel like my opinion is somehow wrong, please, by all means, give me a thorough reasoning for why you wouldn't agree with this, although I don't think that's going to be the case with either. But I know that there are cops, because I've dealt with them, I've talked to them, that are going to have issues with this because of the whole officer safety mentality that has been, sometimes at the academy level, driven into us. When I worked uniform, SWAT, other positions that I held in law enforcement, I just accepted the fact that this may be my final day on earth. And again, there's a lot of hyperbole that usually gets assigned to that, and we in law enforcement can be superstitious by nature. There's certain things that we like to do, our little totems and our St. Michael's and our prayers and everything, and that's all good stuff. But don't throw on a David Grossman blue line sheepdog shirt if you can't live the legend. Be the cop that the public wants you to be, and be the cop that the person who's about to die needs you to be. And again, I don't want to add unnecessary drama to the situation, but I can't really think of any other way to really underline what I'm trying to say. And that is kind of recapping. If you don't think you're that guy, then there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to be that guy, but you can't not be that guy and wear the uniform. The odds of you ever needing to be that guy are small, but the stakes of you failing to be that guy could mean people die who shouldn't have died. And you could be filling the slot of someone who is that guy. So find another profession. There's no shame in it. Just go somewhere else, do something else. If your department is not providing single officer training, get it. Find the program, reach out to me. I can share with you the basic outline of how to develop the program for single officer response. I also provide single officer response. Have your training department contact me. We can set up a class. There are other officers or other training companies out there that provide single officer response, and it is becoming more of the norm. If your department is stuck in a team-based only mentality, it's time for them to see the light, and a justification can easily be written just by getting on Google, spending 15 minutes printing out every time a single officer has closed with and either stopped the shooter or denied him access or caused him to self-terminate, which, as far as I'm concerned, same thing. That's pretty much my thoughts. I don't really have anything else to add specifically. I'm not going to go into the political side of things because I think everybody knows how I feel when it comes to gun rights. I don't think I really need to cover that. I'm not going to talk about the arming teachers debate or anything. I just wanted to address the tragedy, not only of the shooting itself, but the fact that there were officers on scene and they didn't do shit. And it took a department from another agency showing up to actually put work in. And one unarmed off-duty officer to help to respond to run towards gunfire out of uniform without a weapon and start rendering aid to the first victims he encountered. If anyone from Broward County Sheriff's Department is watching this, you guys need to fix your shit. And you probably know that. But your sheriff should probably be motivated to find employment elsewhere. And maybe take a serious look at your training program and figure out maybe you're not putting enough money into the things that matter. That's all I got. I'm Aaron Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.